Hello and welcome to Chemspec Digital 2021. I have the pleasure to introduce the next presentation in the RSC Lecture Theatre. However, before I do, I would like to point out that this session is being recorded and to make it available to view on demand afterwards. Attendees are invited to write questions about the presentations to the presenter in the chat function, and we will read them out at the very end. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Charlotte Wiles of Chemtrix, who will be presenting transformation of supply chains using modular continuous flow reactors.
Thank you, Christiana. So, as you've just heard, we're looking into the use of continuous flow reactors as a means of transforming supply chains. And this is more about the supply issues that we've seen, obviously, over the last few months and year now due to COVID. But it's a technology advancement that's been in the play for 15, 20 years. And people are now seeing the benefit of small, modular, compact units that can be readily deployed across different countries. So what you can see here is just a little company profile, a little background to us. We've been working in the area of continuous manufacturing and continuous flow chemistry since 2008 as a company. And we're a mix of chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, and chemists looking to harness the advantages of process intensification at the lab, pilot, and production scale. And this is obviously not a technology that you implement alone. We partner widely and we don't compete. So this is a very cooperative community of vendors and users. And we work with universities through to industrial manufacturers, system integrators, suppliers, in order to deliver end-to-end solutions for whatever the problem statement is. So in the last 18 months, we've obviously all seen the impact of COVID, hence why we're at Chemspec Digital and not the live event this year yet. And this has highlighted to us how much each country relies on outsourcing in order to obtain critical raw materials, APIs, and even electronic goods. So we've seen in the past 15 years, people have wanted to reshore manufacturing, but it hasn't really happened. And this period has really highlighted local supply chains are needed in order to overcome the challenges that have been seen. So APIs especially, raw materials and intermediates, is a very global business with molecules moving from country to country as the value addition increases. But the border closures, travel bans, and industry shutdowns that we've seen during the COVID period, and even continuing post with difficulties with shipping, have really showed up the resistance that we need within our supply chains, the critical raw materials. So we're now seeing widespread through US, India, China, Europe, countries assessing alternative value chains. Can they manufacture locally? Can they finish goods locally? And can they do this on time with surge protection, as opposed to shipping in and stockpiling material from a single country? So this is now an assessment of the value of reducing costs by outsourcing versus the cost of doing nothing and having problems again in the future. So de-risking a supply chain is obviously a great idea, and people are wanting to shift from a deglobalization, localization strategy. However, there is often a lack of infrastructure in those countries that people are wanting to reshore to. And this is a consequence of heavy reliance on outsourcing, meaning even if you do have infrastructure, you may not have the workforce available in order to implement the changes that you're looking for. Often you'll find in Europe a lot of reformulation takes place, not necessarily the API production itself. So bringing this skill set back into the industry is also key, along with infrastructure changes. So there are significant opportunities to alleviate the risk associated with pandemics and geopolitics on your supply chain and the ability to go to just-in-time manufacturing. However, as I say, this does require planning. It does require retooling and reskilling of your workforce. So it is an opportunity to bring in new technology, including digitalization, continuous manufacturing, and small repeatable module units, which is the area that we focus on. So in the past, we've seen that the technology has been quite challenging to implement as a result of existing infrastructure. So if you already have a batch vessel, you continue to use the batch vessel. So people have been looking towards their fine specialty and APIs with a view of lowest landed cost. And this is typically being outsourced and produced, as we say, in someone else's backyard. And in the future, we can now see that people have a known value associated with resilience and having local manufacturing control, if only being able to get it across your country and deployed more quickly and not stuck at borders due to shipping issues. So we're seeing a big shift, and key stakeholders, as we discussed last year, in this change are going to be regulators and governments. We see companies are very willing to make changes. They're really willing to bring back manufacturing and start to have more upstream control. But we are going to need support from governments and regulators to enable people to make these changes and bring back chemistry to areas that may not have done early stage hazardous chemistry for maybe 5 to 10 years. So there needs to be a regulatory and financial burden of change addressed. And we do see countries bringing in funding and grant support for people to start making the change. As you can imagine, this is not going to change overnight, but it is starting at an R&D level with people taking a look at what's possible and which parts of the value chain they need to be addressing in order to give their industry the resilience required. So we're seeing diversification in companies and countries, and we're seeing people look towards installing smaller footprint, flexible installations, moving more towards a on-demand manufacturing and reduced work in progress, reduced stockpiling, which obviously reduces your costs associated with manufacturing. As a result of this, these small units can be deployed in many different areas, and we see companies developing in Europe and replicating in the US or Singapore, for example, as a means of developing local manufacturing strategies. So the risk tolerance and supply chain resilience that's come to the forefront due to COVID is really making a good business case for why people should look at small modular footprint flexible manufacturing. So one aspect of this, and not the only solution, but one aspect is continuous manufacturing. We see from the small footprint of the equipment, the process intensification associated with it, that people can now harness improved process control and shorter development times as a means of performing particularly hazardous chemistries. As a result of this, you end up with a small production unit that's typically in a pilot plant environment compared to a world plant environment. As a result of this small footprint, you obviously have many benefits towards energy consumption and material production per unit area. So the technology is something that we're seeing being more heavily adopted in the pilot to production area than we've previously seen in the past. And we see many more companies starting researching, trying to get to grips with what advantages can this technology bring and where should they deploy it to alleviate problems that they've observed over the last 2 years. We also see for the companies that had already pre-invested in this area, companies are directly developing in flow now. They're not first developing a batch route and then putting it into a flow reactor and possibly needing to modify the process, but we are seeing people developing directly, and this is increasing again the speed to market and reducing investment costs and giving the flexibility that people are targeting. So here you can see a few examples of different strategies towards small and modular. One of the biggest questions we get asked is, how can I make my flow system flexible? Flexibility means lots of different things to lots of different people. It could be flexibility towards different products, different raw materials, different locations of manufacture, and different production capacities. So it's really important before you start that you identify what you need from a continuous plant, and this will help you design and engineer in the most forward-thinking approach, but actually the most suitable for the particular molecule that you're wanting to implement initially. And I think it's this flexibility that brings a lot of attraction to contract manufacturers, as they're able to reconfigure the hardware to deliver different molecules and different campaign lengths for different customers. So in the images, what you can see here on the left-hand side is a plant developed by Zeton and built for GSK. And you can see from the grid-like structure, modules are built together in order to deliver the final configuration. This allows you to have freedom over repurposing pumps, residence time units, chillers, etc. So you could redeploy these parts smartly to develop different processes and manufacture different materials. In the center here, you've got a system that I'll show you a little bit more detail later from Fluid, working together with a pharmaceutical company. And you can see this is it. It's got wheels. It's a small modular footprint flow reactor. And the idea here is that it can be wheeled into a factory, and it actually sits between existing batch assets that form the upstream and downstream reaction steps. So here you've got something small, modular, but more dedicated to a single piece of chemistry or a class of chemistries. And on the right, you can see an installation that we've got together with Patheon, Thermo Fisher in Austria. And you can see modularity here is addressed with multiple reactors in parallel, allowing you to turn up or down productivity as market demand changes. So there's many different ways to approach flexibility, but you can see in all cases, you have small production units with agility to flex to the demand of the market. So for those of you that are new to continuous, I'll just give you a little brief as to the main features of flow reactions and how they're performed. You are typically working with reagent streams that need to be separated before they are mixed, and that's when the transformation takes place. So typically we're working with a pair of pumps, some form of mixing element, a thermal control section, and a collection strategy. So the key to understanding how you work with flow is that you're adapting your equipment to suit your chemistry, and you're not adapting your chemistry to suit your batch vessel. So if you have a highly energetic chemistry, for example, you're going to be looking at a small channel with a high surface to volume ratio that can relatively easily cope with the heat release. If you've got a suspension-based chemistry, you would be looking at a reactor with a larger volume and maybe active mixing with inside it so that you can handle that slurry. So we're not trying to squeeze all chemistries into flow, but we're looking for those ones that have a technical benefit for transforming into a continuous process. So the heart of a system you would think would be the reactor, but honestly, you need a good dosing system. If you're not delivering well to your reactor a good stable flow of reagent, you will get deviations in your product, and this will affect the quality of what you're generating. So really key is to choose your dosing system well and ensure that it's appropriate for the reaction conditions, the temperature, the pressure, and the corrosivity of your chemical. You then choose an appropriate reactor with the right thermal control associated with it, depending on the exotherm that's required. You put PAT in place, could be as simple as flow meters, pressure temperature sensors, all the way through to UPLC for online or at-line determination of your critical raw material attributes and product attributes. It's not just the reactor, as you'll see later in the session today. Downstream operations like crystallization, liquid-liquid extraction can all be transformed continuous. So you start to look at multiple unit operations for your efficient, small, compact production unit. And then this all gets put together in a unit, typically skid mounted, as you can see here. So on the left, you've got your feed vessels, in the center, your reactor and your heat transfer unit. And then on the right, you'll be collecting your reaction product. And because of the intensification of these processes, you are typically in what would normally be a kind of pilot scale environment, but you're able to manufacture really significant quantities of material, as I'll show you in some of the examples. So the challenges and the opportunities with flow come from the scale that you're working at. And here we've got an example from Eli Lilly. And this just gives you a broad overview of why people would technically choose to use continuous. You can see you've got your high energy reactions, your fast processes, unstable intermediates, ability to do route redesign and approach either convergent or divergently your molecule, expanding capacity. So many different reasons why you would choose to use the technology. And it's really important at the outset of a project that you identify why you're looking to transform your process or conduct it in flow. And this will help you with the implementation really clearly from the outset. So we've been addressing in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years, priority areas of companies where initially energy cost reduction, waste generation reduction, and an increase in process safety and reaction efficiency. And obviously the last 2 years, that's also shifted to supply chain management and local production control. So we take projects with partners all the way from theoretical evaluation through to realization. And one of the key parts of continuous manufacturing is defining your process targets. What are you trying to do by going continuous? What's the actual problem that you're trying to fix? We see a lot of R&D laboratories defining a problem statement without necessarily talking to pilot or production colleagues. And as a result, there can be a solution to a problem that's not really there by the time you get through to manufacturing, and vice versa. The manufacturing colleagues solve on a daily basis a lot of challenges that the R&D team may not be aware of. So we put a lot of energy upfront into this theoretical evaluation. What are the company's opportunities for process improvement, and what is the real problem statement? Once that's in mind, you can go over to feasibility studies. You can do this in-house, you can do this with a partner or a contract research organization, but you perform the initial lab trials that can deliver proof of concept and outline the milestones that need to be achieved for an optimal process. And if you get a go at that stage, you go into the more detailed parameter optimization, which also, very importantly, defines the process parameters for your engineering design. We get a lot of questions about how much will this cost at the beginning of a project, and it's not possible to give a plus or minus 10% kind of price without knowing your optimal parameters and what it means to implement within a specific company. Local site regulations, country-specific rulings all have impact on what that installation will look like, and it's not just the chemical process. So you can see this involves mixed teams and working really closely together in order to design and produce and commission a small module production flow plant. But once you've got it, replicating it and putting it in a different location is very straightforward to do. So I'm going to give you some examples now of how people have used the technology, typically focusing on energetic chemistries, ones where control were required and local manufacturing and small-scale storage were trying to be avoided. So here you can see a piece of work that we did on an Dakin oxidation using peroxide. We've got here inline infrared unit, and we're also looking at using a metal-free flow reactor, largely due to the hazards associated with handling peroxide within metal-based systems. The target of the company was a more direct oxidation route as opposed to multi-stages to get to catechol kind of materials. And they had had an issue with storage of hydrogen peroxide on site many years back. So they were looking at a small scale continuous use of that material rather than large batch tank operation. And what we were able to do was transform the process from 6-hour fed batch into a 30-second flow reactor, obtaining in a typical shift of 8 hours in the lab, just under 5 kilos of material. So if this needs to then go into production, depending on the material requirements of the market, you would leave this reactor running for longer, or you would upscale to a larger unit and go into a pilot infrastructure. If we're looking towards chemistries that are challenging to perform, we did a piece of work with AstraZeneca and Graz University with Oliver Capé. And here you can see AstraZeneca were targeting a specific reduction to be performed via the Wolff-Kishner reaction. The use of hot hydrazine, highly caustic, high temperature reaction mixtures meant this is a challenge to actually do at scale. So we looked at developing a continuous process, again targeting metal-free because of the degradation of the hydrazine in the presence of a metal and the highly caustic material that was being used. And for flow, this is not a particularly short reaction time. 20 minutes were needed in order to efficiently reduce the material, but that was enough to increase the yield by 40% and have a high product purity by changing solvent from what would traditionally have been used in the batch environment. So this is something where we're able to increase throughput, decrease reaction time, and obtain active pharmaceutical ingredients using small footprint systems. It's not just Europe where these activities are taking place. We see partners in China developing new synthetic routes, new cost-effective methods as a mechanism of producing nutraceuticals, for example. Here you can see vitamin B1 or thiamine, which starts from a raw material where we're having to do a very selective, specific monochlorination. Using a flow reactor here, you can see in the schematic, we're able to feed the lactone in directly with chlorine gas with a scrubber after and obtain the chlorinated intermediate. This is then treated downstream with a decarboxylative acylation, also continuous, obtaining the product with a 30-second reaction time and a moderate temperature of 25 degrees. So you can perform highly energetic chemistries due to the high surface to volume ratio that these reactors bring you. And this is a process now that's actively being scaled up as a telescoped process to vitamin B1. So local manufacturing has got the potential to have the most impact in countries that do not have existing infrastructure. So if you consider countries like South Africa and other underdeveloped countries when it comes to chemical manufacture, they're almost paying over the odds for active pharmaceutical ingredients that then need to be formulated locally to be delivered to the local population. And we see a huge potential in countries such as South Africa having their own API manufacturing. And because batch doesn't exist in these territories, it's a good location for people to go directly into the newest technology and start to look to continuous. So here's an example that Professor Watts presented 2 weeks back at the CFRT virtual event. And his work focuses on developing synthetic routes to APIs that have benefit to the local population in South Africa. So historically, a lot of antiretroviral work has been done by this group, and more recently looking into diabetes management. So this is a global concern. However, locally in South Africa, as diets are changing, there is an increase in the incidence of type 2 diabetes. So together with partners, Professor Watts is looking into synthetic strategies to locally develop these generic drugs. And this will give control not only on formulation locally, but also the API, and that will give cost reduction and also more availability to the local population. So here you can see an example of their setup performed within a glass-based reactor system that you can see here. And they've done recently 4 different anti-diabetic active pharmaceutical ingredients. You can see 2 common structures with different R groups giving access to different final products. And here from a small, really lab scale 20 mil size reactor, you're able to be demonstrating at the sub to multi-kilo level per day within a research institute. So this is a significant step towards local API manufacture in South Africa, now capable of getting up to almost 32 kilos a week from a fume cupboard in order to demonstrate the viability of this technology. Other companies also look at small footprint, larger manufacturing, and this tends to be in the contract manufacturing space. Here's a piece of work with Buchem, a Dutch company, also with the engineering with a partner, Fluid. There was a production challenge due to headspace, looking at as you scale a process, the headspace influence on the reaction actually was looking towards a stalling of a chemical process. So it wasn't really very straightforward to make more than a kilo of a target material for their particular customer. So together we developed the process chemistry at the lab scale and transferred that into this pilot unit that you can see here. The material was a lacrimator, very smelly compound, also huge emphasis on putting this in a small footprint enclosed environment. And what they developed was a dosing system fed from an adjacent fume cupboard. The flow reactor and product collected within the second fume cupboard here. You can see the automation panel designed by Flowid on the front. And then the material went straight into a rotovapor. And this was then easily able to be processed downstream for the final reaction step. So this allowed, from a really small footprint environment, to go from a few kilos up to kind of tonnage levels. And this meant annual production requirements for this particular customer could be accessed just from a simple fume cupboard. Looking to running out of space, we're seeing in developed production environments that the infrastructure is getting really crammed full of hardware, and companies can't continue to keep expanding with their footprint. So in 2017, with Anthem Biosciences, we set up the ability to start looking continuously as a means of better usage of their existing footprint of their manufacturing facility. And the concept there was that they could do contract research, a few hundred grams, develop up to ton scale without needing to continually increase the footprint of their manufacturing site. You can see historically between 2007 and 2015, they went for batch infrastructure and a very significant increase in acreage and also reactor volume. Going on from this, we're looking at putting small modular footprint equipment within that existing infrastructure to access tonnage quantities of material for customers. So not only better use of infrastructure, but reduced cycle times, reduced effluent generation, and a faster material delivery for their clients. As an innovator, Merck have worked with Flowid and ourselves to develop a flow process. So chemistry developed in-house and then engineering outsourced to come to this small mobile continuous flow reaction step, as I said before, that fits within the existing batch infrastructure to use input from a batch vessel, continuous flow, and then batch input again. So this is a hybrid system looking at debottlenecking a plant and was used for a generation 2 formulation. So you can see going from generation 1 to generation 2, by targeting continuous, a number of reaction steps were reduced. The overall yield of the process was dramatically increased, and the process mass intensity significantly decreased together with cost of goods. So for innovators, we're not always seeing this technology adopted for the first generation process, but we are seeing an awful lot of second generation and generic manufacturers targeting process improvements using continuous. So Ajinomoto Biopharma are one such company. So they're a contract research and manufacturing organization that switched to flow and specifically pilot scale continuous towards the end of 2017. In this particular process that I'll show you, they chose continuous because they had 3 exothermic reaction steps that required very slow fed batch addition. This, as a contract manufacturer, is not advantageous because it uses up your batch capabilities simply for slow material addition to maintain reaction control and temperature. In addition, they've got a potent product, so they'd like to be obviously contained and minimizing exposure to the operator in order to perform this chemistry. So as I say, towards the end of 2017, at the pilot scale, they had developed a continuous process where they were transforming the first 2 highly energetic reaction steps within our plant-rich reactors as a means of minimizing issues with scale-up on thermal control. And they found that they were able to get a higher productivity compared to batch, almost double, when they actually moved into their small pilot equipment. So here you can see, again, a similar strategy to GSK. Small modules comprising of pumps, reactors, dosing, control units. And the advantage here was that they were able to take these individual small units, test them within the laboratory. And once they were sure that this was all working as they wanted, the whole unit could then be moved and used for production. So there was no tech transfer between the piloting work and the manufacturing. So this obviously gives you increased process robustness and speed for making that transfer. In addition, 70% of the process went continuous, which improved batch capacity utilization that could be used for other production processes and other customers. And since 2017, when that piloting work has taken place, they've been working to scale up and commission a larger production unit. You can see this in the picture here on the left. So now you have your dosing system, your reactor, you can see your input controls for your thermal control here. So still a really small footprint. And this is 3 chemical steps, 2 continuous and 1 batch, delivering over 500 metric tons of active compound produced since commissioning in 2020. So in addition to the advantages that they found at the pilot scale, the industrial multi-stage continuous process has allowed them to demonstrate that they could reach the target price for the material production for their client, and they could increase the annual output compared to the dedicated synthesis unit based on batch, which was 250 metric ton per year restricted. And it's released at the synthesis unit to 6,000 litre vessels, which now can be used for additional batch processes again. The outlook is that there are further improvements that can be made, and they're actively working on downstream batch steps to increase the output beyond the 500 metric tons per year, excuse me, and development work that's been ongoing alongside this commissioning has shown that a 3rd reaction step is also feasible continuously. So the plan is that a 2nd installation of this type on another Ajinomoto site will take place, and that will have all 3 steps continuous, giving you over half a 500 metric ton per year capabilities on a 2nd location. So this shows you how you can develop modular from the lab into pilot, into production, and then look to be replicating as the market demand changes. So in addition to continuous and the actual flow process itself, we need to be looking how we control our processes. And we do see a lot of advancements for advanced process control, looking towards analytical feedback needing to be much quicker in a continuous process than in batch. We need techniques that reflect the process state at that precise time, not 10 minutes, an hour, 2 days later. So we need to be constantly monitoring our processes for quality and for corrective action. And we see that advanced process control brings us benefits towards having fully automated, fully repeatable, deployable production units. So we design at the lab and pilot a manufacturing process that needs to meet the critical quality attributes and the targets of that particular molecule. And we need to understand early on impact in process parameter variability. This is specifically related more to the engineering aspect than the chemistry, where we can understand what influence deviations on pressure, temperature, flow rate can have on the product quality. And this allows you to come into this high process control, high process understanding area, giving you robustness of your process within the tolerances of the engineered equipment that you decide to implement. So by monitoring constantly, we have a consistency of quality. We can reduce our operating costs, and you reduce the reliance on corrective action and manpower for operating such plants. So it, as I say, it also helps with replicating the units, because if you duplicate what you have, the same reaction product will be possible within a different environment. So this is key to decentralizing manufacturing, bringing advanced process control and continuous together. So to summarize, we are seeing recent global events changing the way people are looking at manufacturing of fine chemicals specialty through to the APIs. And there is a favouring of in-house or local and distributed manufacturing models on the basis of small production units rather than global single source world plants. And whilst continuous manufacturing is not the answer to everything, it does bring an opportunity to change conventional supply chains and have model predictive control, modular, flexible, small units that can address part of the industry requirements. So it's not a new technology. It's used really widely in oil and gas, food industries, but we are seeing the last 5 years, it really is becoming more of a revolution in the fine agro and pharma applications. And the advantages are realistic. They're about process intensification and process improvement, looking towards safety and product quality. But from a business perspective, just-in-time manufacturing, reductions in your capex and opex, and shorter de-risked supply chains are what are pushing this forwards at the moment. So potential to improve supply chains, replicating point of use, on-demand manufacture, and responding to local demands, even if it's for pandemic situations like the Americans are putting together strategies to be able to deal with things like COVID a second time. But we are seeing very many different ways that this modularization can help address supply chain challenges within the industry. So it's a really big contrast to where we were 2-3 years ago, where stockpiles were the solution, but now we're looking at local manufacturing. Regulatory is a really clear place that additional work is needed. People have a bit of a reservation, especially pharma companies. Will the regulators accept this technology? In July this year, the draft guidance ICH Q13 was released for comment. So I urge you all to take a look at that. It's a big document, but it's got a lot of information about drug substance versus drug product, continuous manufacturing. And this just builds on the FDA's background of consistently, vocally stating that things that bring better quality towards the final product for the customer are approved by them. We can see up to 2019, there were 5 applications of continuous manufacturing approved. These were drug, actually oral solid doses. However, in subsequent years, we have seen the first API also approved by the US FDA. So it's a technology that is increasing in its implementation, all the way from critical raw materials through to the API. And with that, I'd be more than happy to take any questions if there are any, and happily meet with anybody that would like to discuss further at our booth.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That was great. And yes, we do have one question that's come in. You've shown a number of advantages associated with flow chemistry. What are some of the challenges?
There's 2, I would put them into 2 different sections, to be honest. There's the technical challenge, and then there's the business challenge. So technically, people are not routinely trained in the use of continuous manufacturing. Most graduates will not have experienced it, and they will be trained in standard batch technology. So as a result, it takes time to embed that knowledge within the industry so that people are aware of what makes for a good flow process, how do you develop one, and what should you be looking out for to decide if it is actually the right technology for you. So I think there's a lot more work to be done at an education level. And I think that's why we see a lot of contract manufacturers working in this area, because innovator companies don't necessarily have the skill set internally. So they go out to a company that has that expertise. But we see increasing numbers of PhD students coming through, which is a good start. But I think a challenge is in the education side of people being aware where this technology can help and how they should implement it and choose the equipment. And then from a business side, there's the perceived risk that it's new and they don't necessarily have the engineering skills internally to implement what are typically very small infrastructures compared to building a batch plant. And at that point, that's where you see people outsourcing and working with engineering partners who have that expertise also. So I think it's the general teething problems of new developments, having the right people with the theoretical and practical knowledge to implement it. But we are seeing in the last 5 years a significant number of companies investing to learn and then being ready to find the right solution when the problem comes along.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you so much. This marks the end of our session. Thank you very much to our presenter, Charlotte, and feel free to reach out to Chemtrix on the platform and arrange further meetings. And thank you all attendees for watching. Goodbye.